Today we'll be discussing the presidencies of Theodore Roosevelt and William Howard Taft and discussing the impact that they had on the progressive era. Our essential question: how did Theodore Roosevelt change the power of the presidency? So first, let's talk about how the progressive presidents were different than the ones that came before them. You'll remember that the Gilded Age presidents were laid back and hands-off, and really didn't use their power. The progressive presidents were powerful and involved in the government. They used their power for the good of the nation. And also, they began to regulate industry in order to give power back to the people. So there's going to be a transfer of power out of the hands of the wealthy elite, out of the hands of these businessmen, and back to the American people. Theodore Roosevelt was a very dynamic person. He quit his job as Assistant Secretary of the Navy to go down to Cuba and fight in the Spanish-American War, leading a group called the Rough Riders. We'll talk about that more in Unit 3. After his presidency was over, he went hunting on an African safari. And while he was campaigning for president, he was shot in the chest. And instead of seeking medical attention, he just continued to give his speech. And I know you're thinking, how does a man get shot in the chest? He actually had his folded up speech, and it was like a couple of inches thick in his eyeglasses case, and that's what the bullet hit. So, like, he did have a wound. He was bleeding, but it didn't go deep enough to cause him, like, serious harm. But, like, y'all, this man got shot and continued to give his campaign speech. Amazing. So, Theodore Roosevelt was elected vice president in 1900, and he became president after the assassination of William McKinley. The funny thing about Theodore Roosevelt's rise to the presidency was that he had actually been like pushed out of New York government. They thought that he was not the type of man that they wanted to have because he was an advocate for the people. They thought he had too much power. So they're like, we'll make him VP where he doesn't have a lot of say. And lo and behold, the president is shot, and now Theodore Roosevelt is the president, the most powerful man in the world. Theodore Roosevelt used his bully pulpit, a term used to describe like the power of the presidency. The bully pulpit was a terrific platform to advocate an agenda. So Teddy would use the presidency to get done what he thinks is best for the people. Teddy's agenda during his presidency is known as the Square Deal. All right, that was his platform. And in history classes, we remember it as the 3 C's. All right, the 3 C's make up Teddy Roosevelt's platform. Those 3 C's are consumer protection, conservation, and controlling corporations. So basically, Teddy Roosevelt wanted to make a fair government, one that distributed power out of the hands of a few into the hands of many. He wanted to keep the powerful and the wealthy from taking advantage of small businesses and the poor. So that is Teddy Roosevelt's Square Deal. Here's another image that breaks that down for you. We're going to talk about each of these 3 C's in detail. The first C is consumer protection. So the Meat Inspection Act was passed by Congress and signed by Teddy Roosevelt in 1906. Basically, this just says that meat must be inspected before it's sold, right? That's what we come to expect nowadays when we go to the grocery store, that the meat that we're consuming is not going to make us sick or kill us because it has been inspected for safety. The Meat Inspection Act also required processing plants that made this meat to be inspected for, sanitation and health reasons as well. Hopefully, you already know what precipitated this Meat Inspection Act, and that was the publication of The Jungle, which we heard an excerpt from, that showed the deplorable conditions that Chicago's meatpacking plants were in. The same year, the Pure Food and Drug Act is also passed. This led to the inspection of other foods and medicine to make sure that they meet safety and health regulations. It banned the shipment of impure food, food that wasn't safe for consumption, and also banned mislabeling because there was a trend during this time. One example would be they would advertise like a magic elixir that would fix all of your problems. And really it was just lotion that was put into a fancy bottle, but they would charge people a lot of money for it. So this was a way that we protect consumers, make sure they know what they're buying and that it is safe to use. The second C is conservation. Hopefully you're familiar with the term conservation. It comes from conserve, and what we're conserving is land and natural resources. During his presidency, Teddy Roosevelt designated 230 million with an M, acres of land for public use in parks. Friends, that is roughly the size of the country France that Teddy Roosevelt helped save for future generations. During his presidency, the U.S. Forest Service is also established. 150 national forests are designated, as well as 5 national parks. For this reason, Teddy Roosevelt is known as our conservationist president, because he was really the first guy to take on this issue. He had a close friendship with John Muir, a man who's pictured here. Of course, that's Teddy. And it was John Muir and his efforts that helped establish Yosemite National Park in California. So, if you are a fan of natural parks, of natural resources, of being able to go out and explore our country's beautiful resources, you can thank Teddy Roosevelt. Our third C is controlling corporations. All right. Those big businesses that had run rampant during the Gilded Age, that had gathered all of this wealth while exploiting their employees and exploiting consumers, that is going to begin to come to an end during the Progressive Era. Teddy, was known as a trust buster. You remember that a trust is another word for a monopoly. So, how did we begin controlling these corporations? First of all, we gave power to the Sherman Antitrust Act. Remember, that was passed way back in 1890, but had never been used for its intended purpose, right? It had previously been used to break up labor unions. We're now going to use it to break up the trust and the monopolies. Teddy also made a distinction between trust. You'll recall that one of the effects of monopolies and trust was that it made the United States very, very wealthy, right? That was good for our economy, just bad for the people. So Teddy recognized that some trust should be allowed to stick around if they provided fair prices, right? Because they were good for the country. We see over here in this cartoon, Teddy has slain the bad trust, all right? Put it down. He's killed it. And notice the good trust, right? He's got it on a leash that reads restraint. So he's not going to let those other trusts just do whatever they want. They're going to be monitored and made sure that they're not taking advantage of the people. So those are our 3 C's. So some of the things that Teddy Roosevelt did during his presidency, one of the first was end a coal strike that was happening in Pennsylvania. This is known either as the coal strike of 1902 or as the anthracite coal strike. And you think back to those 4 main strikes that we talked about during the Gilded Age. Who did the government always side with? They always sided with big business. Teddy Roosevelt whenever he became president, supported the laborers. He supported the workers. All right, this was huge because it set a precedent that the president can intervene in strikes to protect the American people. Sorry, I don't know why this little bar won't go away, but that word there is people. So for the first time, we see the government supporting the laborers instead of the big business. Northern Securities versus U.S. is a court case from 1904. Northern Securities was a railroad company owned by our friend J.P. Morgan. I hope you remember that name, one of our big wealthy businessmen. The ruling in Northern Securities was the trust was ordered to be broken up. All right, the business was too big and had to be broken down into smaller companies to provide competition, right? Because it's competition, multiple businesses providing the same service that causes prices to go down. And prices going down is good for, right, the people, the consumers. So this is important because it was Teddy's first big victory against the trust. Northern Securities versus the U.S. U.S. won. The people won. Teddy Roosevelt won. It was also the first time that the Sherman Antitrust Act had been used to break up a monopoly. So the first time the Sherman Antitrust Act was used for its intended purpose. Yay. American Tobacco versus the U.S. was another big court case that brought down a big business. I like to include this example because y'all are probably familiar with the name Duke, J.B. Duke. American Tobacco was in Durham. The outcome of this court case was that the tobacco trust must be broken up into several smaller companies, like the American Tobacco Company, R.J. Reynolds, Liggett and Myers, names that you may be familiar with. Standard Oil. Yes, in 1911, Standard Oil monopoly is broken up. I know that these names are familiar to you. Exxon, Mobil, Chevron. So the companies that were created from the breakup of Standard Oil Company went on to become huge businesses themselves. You can see that there's a link to a video here. I will post this video. You should watch it and answer the questions that are on your notes. So, was Teddy the greatest trust buster? Not quite. All right. Teddy Roosevelt, during his presidency, broke up 41 trusts. Taft, who followed him, did more than twice as many, broke up 90 trusts. And then Woodrow Wilson, our third progressive president, broke up 203. So why do you think TR gets the nickname Trust Buster? Why do we call him the Trust Buster instead of Woodrow Wilson? Think on that for a second. Most of you are probably thinking along the lines that TR was the first to do it. And that is right. All right, he was the first trust buster, so therefore that's kind of what we remember him for. His presidency set the stage for the following presidents to continue to break up these big trusts. In the early 1900s, we also saw the railroads conquered. You'll remember the problem with the railroads was that they had created monopolies. They hurt the common people, especially the farmers, because they charged really high prices, but would give, breaks to big companies that could afford to pay them off. So two pieces of legislation we see against the railroads. The Elkins Act in 1903 imposed fines on railroads that gave special rates to shippers. This was something that hurt the common man. And also the Hepburn Act gave the ICC, the Interstate Commerce Commission, the power to enforce regulation. So the ICC was a commission that was created back during the Gilded Age as well to oversee the railroads, but they had never been it had never been enforced. So we're going to see that them beginning to enforce those rules to break up railroad monopolies during Roosevelt's presidencies. They also set maximum shipping prices so that these companies couldn't, exploit the common people. So did TR accomplish his square deal? All right, there were 3 C's. You have this chart on your guided notes. I want you to pause and take a few minutes to fill out what TR did to protect consumers, what happened for conservation, and how did he control corporations. Make sure that you circle on your paper yes or no for did TR accomplish his square deal. So let's talk about Roosevelt's successor, which was Taft. TR promised that he would not run again, even though he technically could. There were no term limits at this time. He was a very popular president, but he said, nope, 2 terms is enough for me. He handpicked his successor to carry out his policies. All right, he expected William Howard Taft to continue doing the same things he had done. Taft was a close friend of Teddy Roosevelt. However, Taft did not follow in Teddy's footsteps, and this is going to be the end of their bromance. And we'll follow that whole drama next week. So we see over here, TR is evacuating the White House. All right, that's his big stick that we haven't talked about yet, but that's being carried out. And he's handing off this package, all right, a little mini Teddy labeled My Policies to, yep, this is Taft, who is expected to, babysit his policies and continue doing what TR wanted him to do. And he is not. Let's talk about a few things Taft did that angered Teddy Roosevelt. The first thing was that he signed the Payne-Aldrich tariff. You know, at least I hope you know, that a tariff raises taxes on imported goods. Taft signed this, and progressives were angry. Why would progressives be angry about raising taxes on imported goods? Who does a tariff benefit? Yes, the businesses. And who does it make things more expensive for? The people. Very good. Another thing that Taft did was he fired Gifford Pinchot, who Teddy Roosevelt had appointed chief of the U.S. Forest Service. Taft fired him from that position, and Teddy Roosevelt was really not happy. Taft also attacked all trust. He didn't make that distinction between good and bad trust as TR had done, which also upset Teddy Roosevelt. So, what do y'all think Teddy Roosevelt will do in reaction to Taft not following his policies? What will Teddy Roosevelt do? If you're thinking that he'll come back and run for president again, you are absolutely correct. And that's where we'll pick up next time.